Welcome to the webinar.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for Biologically Focused Lighting for Health and Wellness, a SAGE webinar presented by Robert Soler. At this time, I'd like to invite Robert to introduce himself.
Hi, so I'm Robert Soler, VP of Human Biological Technologies and Research at BIOS. Just quickly, BIOS is a company, an R&D company that develops light engines for integration with architectural lighting manufacturers. I will go into more details about myself in a slide.
Great, thank you, Robert. My name is Jill Schrader. I'm a SAGE Education Committee member, and I will be moderating this webinar session. If you're interested in being a part of the SAGE Education Committee, please email us at info@sagefederation.org. During this webinar, you'll be muted through the entire session. You will have the option to type in any questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the top of your screen. We will answer those at the conclusion of the session if time allows. Please keep your questions relevant to the topic that is being discussed, and please, I do want to stress, we do welcome your questions. If you would like SAGE to continue offering quality educational programs for its members, please stay online until the conclusion of the webinar, at which time you'll be prompted to complete a brief survey. SAGE is an AIA-approved provider, and participants in this course are eligible for one AIA Health, Safety, and Welfare Learning Unit. Please note that you must be registered for and logged into the webinar to receive AIA credit or a certificate of completion. SAGE will report credits earned by course attendees to AIA CES and will provide certificates of completion if requested. If you did not enter your member number or request a certificate of completion upon registration, please just email us at info@sagefederation.org. The information presented in today's presentation is protected under copyright. Human visual systems contain receptors dedicated to dedicating daylight that assist in regulating circadian rhythms. Interior lighting is appropriate for these daytime receptors as they provide signals that are too dim and may be considered daytime or too bright to be considered night. This leads to a clock disruption that can disrupt sleep and lead to deleterious health or bad health. Numerous factors exacerbate these concerns amongst the elderly. This seminar describes these solutions for using appropriate biologically focused lighting. The learning objectives in this presentation are as follows, and actually, Robert, I'm going to have you run through these learning objectives. I think it's appropriate.
Sure. Yeah, so the objectives here are to understand the role of these daylight receptors that cue the circadian system, to understand the role of the circadian system to all humans, why is it important, and to understand the inappropriate nature of interior lighting that leads to circadian disruption, and of course, what factors amongst the elderly exacerbate the circadian disruption, and discover how lighting can offer a solution for the circadian disruption, and what specific nuances exist for designing when you're designing for the elderly. So with that, get started.
Yeah, you can, without further ado, let's get started with biologically focused lighting for health and wellness. Robert, you can take it from here.
Perfect, thank you. So generally I start out with a who I am and why you should listen to me. So some things about me, I'm an electrical engineer. From there, I went to the Lighting Research Center where I got a master's degree in light. And then from there, I went to NASA where I helped develop the first LED on International Space Station. And then I was the subject matter expert for the lights that, the circadian lighting system for International Space Station. And so International Space Station is a very unique environment in that it orbits the Earth every 90 minutes. And so what happens in that scenario is our circadian clocks don't know how to handle that kind of information. And so what it does is it kind of gives up. And so our clocks default to something that is called a free running clock. And so that that is something close to 24 hours, but it's not exactly 24 hours. So for the people who are listening, maybe your individual clock is 24.1 hours or 24.2 hours or 24.3 hours, something close, but not exactly. And so each one has these individual differences. And so that leads to just slight differences. So maybe the difference between, say, half the audience is 24.1 hours and half the audience is 24.2 hours. That's only a 6-minute difference, but that difference continues day after day. So on day 2, it's 12 minutes. On day 10, it's 60 minutes. On day 100, it's 600 minutes. And so these differences allow us or cause us to drift from each other. And what happens is all of a sudden it can quickly become the middle of my day and the middle of someone else's night, and we're trying to work together as a team. That team cohesion becomes very difficult because we're not all on the same page. And so what we did with the space station lighting was we created a spectral solution that understood what the circadian receptors were looking for, so that we could recreate this 24-hour solution so that our clocks wouldn't drift apart and our clocks would have something to synchronize to, so that everyone is on the same page and our clocks are all in sync and unison with one another. And so what is shown here on the bottom is what that system looks like. And so it may have something to do with color, but I want to urge you that what we did was specifically designed towards spectrum and isolated the biology from the visual cue. So this was a project that we started in 2010, and late last year was when this project actually got installed, and I'll show a video of what that looks like. So this is Kate Rubins, who has the first circadian lighting solution on International Space Station. And so what, so we're just at the starting point, but I just want to know, if you ever think from a design standpoint, any of your projects are too long, take too long to actually be implemented. This took over 6 years to be implemented. So this was the longest thing that I have ever done. So in addition to the space station stuff, I was also jet lag mitigation expert for the Olympic ski and snowboard team, the Los Angeles Dodgers, and I recently moved out to San Diego to pursue a PhD in behavioral neuroscience. So all this to be said is that, one, I'm not a sales guy, I'm not a marketing guy. I'm a guy who is passionate about this topic, and so I'm trying to share with you the science and what we understand and how it could be implemented to do greater good. So about this presentation will take you on a journey that illustrates how circadian biology works and translates those that biology to the elderly. So what is the point of circadian lighting? It is to restore a 24-hour cycle. What we understand is we evolved around the most robust time cue, which is the sun. It comes up at the same time today as it will tomorrow, as it will the next day, within seconds. Now, from the solstices at the winter and summer, those could be very different, but from a day-to-day standpoint, it is by far the most robust time cue that we have. And so we have used that to synchronize our clocks to. But now, modern society has broken this relationship because the built environment basically blocks us from that ambient environment. So how do we replicate this indoors? Well, first we have to understand a little bit about what's important, what's cueing the system, what are we looking for in that sunlight. And so daylight is very broad spectrum. It has a lot of energy in various regions, a lot of reds, a lot of violets, a lot of greens. But the key signaling zone for our circadian system is in fact in the sky blue region. And now, if you overlay on top of that some of the newest LED lighting, you'll see that there's something fundamentally different in that traditional LED lighting has a poor amount of these key signaling frequencies. And so what drives this is what drives this key signaling factor is a newly found photopigment called melanopsin. So this was just discovered in 2001. So some technical jargon, it's a photopigment and newly found subset of cells called IPRGCs, or intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. But what we understand about these photoreceptors is that they're completely different than anything that we've ever seen before. They're not by any way the same as what we use for vision. So in a neuronal sense, and the next couple slides are a little bit neuroscience-y, so I apologize, but then we get out into higher level behavior. But when we take a neuronal measurement of what's going on, we actually see that it responds quickly to a light stimulus represented by this black bar. The neuron firing rate responds quickly, but it continues to persist well after that light stimulus is gone. And so what we understand now is that this photoreceptor is kind of integrating light over time. And what it's really doing is it's just trying to get an ambient sense of what's going on in the environment around it. And so what we understand is that it's kind of likened to the ear, where the ear has two functions, both auditory, how we hear, as well as our vestibular system, our balancing system. It has the dual functions, ones which is obvious and ones that's kind of not so obvious. So the eye has two functions as well. The visual response that is very obvious for our eyes, and then these non-visual responses. And so what it integrates over are things like the intensity of light, the wavelength, because it has a peak sensitivity, and the duration, how long you get that light exposure, are all important in how this photoreceptor responds to these light signals. And so basically what we're finding out is this photoreceptor is a sky blue daytime photoreceptor. It is trying to detect daytime. So in a fMRI study where you actually take brain scans in response to this light to trying to get at what the behavioral responses are of this photoreceptor, it reveals some interesting things. Increased alertness is associated with this photoreceptor. Increased working memory, or how we figure things out in our head, like reading comprehension, math problems, stuff that's short-term, almost like RAM on our computer, as well as the emotional response. What our mood is like is based on these photoreceptors. So the factors associated with this are very similar to the previous one, which are the intensity of light, the duration, how long you get that light exposure for, the wavelength, because there's a peak sensitivity, and of course sleepiness, because that is always important. How sleepy we are is how we feel. And so what we understand again is that this photoreceptor drives that daytime vigilance and affect. We're supposed to be diurnal creatures that are more active and vigilant during the daytime, and that this photoreceptor helps drive a lot of those responses. So there are other measured effects that we have. And so if you take an animal model, you can actually stain these photoreceptors and see exactly where they project to in the brain, which really kind of clues us in as to what they're doing. So they project to the OPN, which drives our pupillary light reflex, how our eyes constrict and contract, as well as the LGN, which is a visual processing center that really kind of drives, and what we understand is it drives our brightness perception, how we perceive the brightness of a space to be. And then it projects to the SCN. And the SCN is the location of our master clock, or our circadian rhythms are an orchestra in our bodies. And the SCN is the conductor of that orchestra. So what we understand about these non-visual effects are that, one, it protects the eyes from getting too much light through that OPN function. It encodes the brightness information so that we still perceive it as a certain brightness level. And then it entrains or synchronizes that circadian clock. So when we get that bright light signal, well, this is obviously our daytime signal, and this is obviously what we're synchronizing to. So in order for you to understand why that's important, you have to understand what the circadian clock is. So I will say that the circadian, and I'm super biased in this, but the circadian clock is probably the coolest thing in the world. The circadian clock in our biology strategically times the occurrence of so many biological processes, and it's all done specifically to conserve resources. So our hormone secretions all have a circadian rhythm to it. Our metabolism, how we process food, all has a circadian rhythmicity to it. Our alertness profile has a circadian rhythmicity to it. We're different levels of alertness at various times of day. Our sleepiness profile changes throughout the day so that we can, facilitate sleep at certain times, but not be sleepy all the time. But there's so many other things. What we understand is that, our blood pressure, our cell proliferation, our bodily activity, our enzyme activity, what we understand is that there's even a better time to go to the dentist because the way that our body interacts with the local anesthesia. Our bodies have a circadian rhythmicity to almost everything. In fact, what we find is that 43% of our genetic expression is circadian, which means that it has a peak activity level at a certain time of day, and it has a trough at a certain time of day, and it's the same time every single day. And it's all because that we're trying to have this way of organizing our biology to conserve resources, and it's all very cool. So a lot of these things are very unknown to the common person. We don't know what our hormone secretion looks like, our enzyme levels, our cell proliferation, none of that. But we probably have a good idea of what our sleep and apologize, our alertness levels and our sleep look like on a day-by-day basis. So I want to gear the next portion of this into understanding how sleep and alertness interacts and how we feel on a day-to-day basis. So what we understand is sleep is a two-process model, where on the top here we have sleep pressure, homeostatic sleep pressure that builds up over the course of the day, denoted by these longer downward arrows, meaning the longer the arrow, the more sleepy you are, the more pressure that's built up. So as we're awake, this pressure builds and builds and builds until we have the opportunity to sleep, and then that sleep pressure dissipates, we wake up, and it raises again. And so this is driven by our sleep timing, how long we sleep for. That sleep pressure is all just a function of how much sleep we get. Now, what keeps us from falling on our face at this time when sleep pressure is high is the other process, which is our circadian drive, which combats that sleep pressure. And so what's interesting, because we talked about biological efficiency, you would almost think that from a biological efficiency standpoint, the circadian drive should have equal and opposite reaction to the sleep pressure. But in fact, what we find is that it's not that way, and there's a unique profile to the circadian drive. And within that profile, there are some very interesting things that you can identify with. Specifically at this inflection point, we have an afternoon lull or a post-lunch dip, something that 5-hour energy has totally capitalized on. And then after this lull point, we have this sharp peak and this ramp up. And this is the coolest thing about circadian biology that nobody ever talks about. This is something known as the wake maintenance zone. And the wake maintenance zone is this evolutionary survival process that we have. If you think about before electric lighting, the onset of darkness was a very scary time for us. It's where we as humans went from being predator to being prey. And so it was very important at the onset of darkness, when darkness was coming, for us to get our stuff done, go find safety, and survive to make it to the next day. And so what we find is we actually have this burst of physiological energy in order to do just that. And it's not just physiological energy, there's neurobiological energy as well. We're actually smarter and more creative at this time. And it was all based on survival. We did this because it was important for us to survive the night and make it to the next day. And so what we find is that this process still exists within us today. And so that is the wake maintenance zone. And after that wake maintenance zone occurs, then starts the opening of the sleep gate, the ability for our bodies to fall asleep. And so this is when certain hormones, sleep hormones, are starting to be produced, like melatonin. And so our heart rate decreases, our muscles start relaxing, our immune system kicks up, and we start the recovery process that is sleep. And so these alertness profiles start going down, down, down. where they hit a peak lull at the middle of the night, and then they pick right back up in something that's known as the cortisol awakening response. So this cortisol awakening response is designed specifically to get you out of this sleep phase. And so in order to have that much sleep for that long of time, our bodies actually do this on purpose with something called sleep inertia. So this sleep inertia is within our bodies to keep us asleep for this long period of time. And what that feels like is if you ever go down for a nap and you wake up feeling worse than you went down for that nap, it is sleep inertia that's driving that problem. And so that sleep inertia is saying, hey, look at this homeostatic sleep pressure. We need to get rid of that. So we need to stay asleep in order to get rid of and dissipate all that sleep pressure. So this cortisol awakening response is designed to get you out of bed no matter what, because you need to get out and start that day. And so what this feels like is for people who wake up without an alarm clock. And so what you probably notice is that maybe you wake up at, say, 5 a.m. And at 5 a.m. you wake up no matter what time you went to bed the previous night. So if you went to bed at 10 p.m., you wake up at 5 a.m. If you went to bed at 1 a.m., you wake up at 5 a.m. And it is this cortisol awakening response designed specifically to get you out of bed no matter what. And so now this whole process of circadian drive is driven by that light timing. And so it is not the quantity so much of light as it is the timing of light. So if you were in a cave for 7 days, for example, this process would continue to persist over and over again. It wouldn't be on a 24-hour clock. It would be on what we talked about before. It would be similar to space station, where it'd be 24.1, maybe 24.2, 24.3. It'd be something different, so we would drift. But it would still persist. So we use that light information to figure out what time all these things should happen. And so this interaction, this two-process model, is how sleep works for the ideal person. And now new research is showing that that is like almost none of us, that we all have these individual differences that make us make this less than ideal. And these differences are our chronotype differences. And a chronotype is our self-selected preference for bedtime and wake time. And so a social example of what this looks like is an example from Modern Family. So this particular episode, Cam and Mitch were really frustrated with the offerings of local restaurants. And so a really good restaurant opened up down the street from their house, and they're really excited about that. But as it turns out, everyone is really excited about this restaurant. So making reservations seemed to be quite a challenge. And so this kind of goes through that process where Mitch calls and says, well, they could take us at 5:15 for dinner. Think about what that's like. And Cam says, well, what are we, 80? Who eats dinner at 5:15? And he says, or they could take us at 10:45 for dinner. And Cam says, well, what are we, 20? Who eats dinner at 10:45? And so certainly as a society, we accept that our age might predict who might be, when you might want to eat dinner. But in fact, our age and sex can predict what these preferences are. In fact, this data here is from over 250,000 data points, which shows what those preferences are going to be or predict what those preferences are going to be for men in the dashed line, women in the solid line as we age. And so where high on this y-axis means that you're more likely to be a night owl or a late evening preferring person, and low on this y-axis means that you're more likely to be a morning type person or a early bird type person. And so what we understand is that once we hit puberty, both men and women, there's this sharp tendency to be more and more of a night owl, where men seem to have a stronger tendency than women, both peaking in the late teens, early 20s. And then after this peak, we start to becoming more and more earlier preferring, men and women at different rates, until about age 60, when men and women actually finally agree on what the right time of day is.
And Robert, I'm going to interrupt you on this, and I apologize, but is this chart showing that as we're aging at that 70 and 80, that we're more predictable, or how is that what this?
There's a stronger tendency for us to be more early preferring is what it is. It's that,
Okay.
that those differences go away.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So really the main thing that you should take away from this is that we are more earlier preferring in our 60s, 70s, and 80s. And men and women do seem to agree and be more predictable at that point, for sure. Okay. So most of the time, this is what our internal clock is saying. But most of the time, our social requirements don't agree with these preferences. And so this leads to something called social jet lag, which I'll cover, which is more global, but it's more, hang on one second.
Well, while Robert is attending to that, if you do have questions, please enter them into the Q&A spot on the bottom so that we can address them at the end. Robert, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back.
Oh,
I
perfect.
apologize for that.
That's okay.
A little bit showed up.
That's okay.
All right, yeah, so most of the time our social requirements don't agree with this. And so I'm gonna provide a couple of global examples and then kind of dive into some more elderly specific examples. So what happens is this misalignment leads to something called social jet lag. And so for the working society, social jet lag is defined as a difference in sleep timing on, say, work days versus free days. And what it really comes down to and boils down to is when you want to sleep and wake up versus when you have to sleep and wake up. This is the definition of a social jet lag. And basically what it is very similar to regular jet lag in that, you know, if you're on California time, you fly to New York, you're still on California time, and it takes you some days to acclimate to that New York time. This is like you're on California time and maybe work is on New York time and you're out of phase with it. But really this transcends to all different things. It's not just work, you know, a assisted living community, for example. You know, the social requirements may be something that is just not in sync with what the preferences of the individual might be. And so I want to look at these chronotype differences, revisit the model with these different chronotypes that exist within all of us. So first you have your night owls. And so what happens here is that circadian drive gets shifted to be later. And now that evolutionary wake maintenance zone encroaches the time that you should be asleep, the time that you know you have to go to sleep in order to be productive the next day. But you can't. You're wide awake and you have no idea why. And it's probably has a lot to do with this wake maintenance zone. And so, but society requires you to wake up at a certain time to go to school, go to work, go to all these different things. And so this time you have to wake up because you want to be a productive member of society. And this time is really the time that you hate life. This is the time that you want to be nowhere but your bed. You know you're not going to be productive. You reach for coffee to try to help you with coping with things. But in fact, it's just something that's innate in these night owls. And so what this common strategy of these night owls are is to basically during the week, you know, kind of deal with it. They truncate their sleep and they try to keep up with the norms of society. And then on the weekends, they sleep in to try to make up for it. If anyone has high school or college students, they probably know exactly what this is about. And so this is actually very important. And this is just kind of a real world example because this is more prevalent in high school and college students. There was a study in 2014 that showed the higher the variance of this sleep timing is the best predictor of poor school performance. And in fact, as a result of this research, there's a lot of people who are trying to advocate for high school starting at a later time. And what the schools that have adopted that have shown things like less absenteeism, better academic performance, even less car accidents as a result of this. So there's a very strong and profound effect associated with this chronotype. Now on the flip side, which is probably more relevant to this group, is the early birds. So the early birds have the opposite problem, where that circadian drive shifts earlier, and now that cortisol awakening response dictates the time that you wake up. And so for these people, that might be 4 or 5 in the morning, maybe a socially unacceptable time. And so they know, these people generally will know that they're going to be tired 3 to 4 hours from now. But right now, when the house is quiet or the space is quiet and they could totally fall asleep, sleep in, they can't do it. Their cortisol is peaking at this time and they can't sleep through it. Now, so what these people should do is they should go to bed earlier to compensate for this. But generally, they do a lot of social activities. They hang out with family. They choose not to sleep at those times. So for these people, and at least especially the ones who could afford that, that afternoon lull starts transforming into a late morning nap. And so this is very common amongst the elderly community. And so not to say that there's anything wrong with the nap, but when this nap starts becoming larger and larger, and consequently this nighttime sleeping becomes shorter and shorter and shorter, this leads to something called sleep fragmentation. And so sleep fragmentation has been shown to be important because what we understand, a study in 2011 showed that sleep fragmentation increases the risk of Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline. And so the rationale for why this makes sense is what happens when we fall asleep is that our repair mechanism is such that we repair our body first and then we repair the mind second. So when we have 2 shortened sleep phases, we'll repair our body, and we'll have very little room to repair our mind. So it leads to these cognitive decrements. So why do we have all these variances in chronotype? Well, what we understand is it's a function of modern society. Our clocks are basically confused. They don't know what the right time of day is. And so what we understand is that our circadian rhythms have a sigmoidal response to light. So there is a floor at about 15 lux. So anything below 15 lux is pretty much darkness, and a ceiling at above 1,000 lux. And so basically that's daytime. All these, 1,000 lux is daytime, 10,000 lux is daytime, 100,000 lux, this is all daytime. And then there's this linear transition from 50 to 500 lux, or 5 to 50 foot candles. And so this is neither day nor night. So this is surely day to our circadian system. This is surely night to our circadian system. And this is in between, like a constant twilight. And so from 5 to 50 foot candles, there's this linear transition that is pretty much a twilight that is neither day nor night. So indoor lighting is absolutely inappropriate. This is what indoor lighting is: too dim to be daytime and too bright to be nighttime. So our clocks become very, very
I'm not sure if everyone can hear me. I think we lost Robert, and I'm not sure what's going on, but we're going to find the answer right quick. If you just hang on the line. I think Robert, we lost.
Hello?
You. Oh, there.
Hello?
Yeah, Robert, we've got you now. Yep, we can hear you.
I apologize. The call just dropped me.
Okay. Well, we've got it now. So yeah, we can hear you loud and clear. Go ahead.
Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Technology won that round. All right, where did I lose you guys?
We're on the slide of the indoor lighting being sometime inappropriate it's too dim or too bright.
Yep. Okay. Okay. So what we understand, and this study was actually conducted in 2000. So we understand a lot more about the design parameters. So it's not just simply that we have to have so many lux in order to do this, but there are things that we could do so that during the daytime we could approach this ceiling that is obviously day to these photoreceptors, and at night approach this nighttime floor. So we could clearly delineate day versus night to drop this variance of chronotype, which is very interesting. Let's see. All right, so, and what's more important is that this problem, which is abundant, and in fact, just to elaborate on this idea of social jet lag has been shown to be existent in 87% of non-shift workers. So this is clearly an epidemic that hinders us all. And so what we understand is that this problem is even worse for the aging community. And I'll elaborate why. So elderly specific problems. First, the eye is getting older. And so the inner optics of our eye reduces light levels reaching the back of the eye, making it even harder. We have cataracts, so blue attenuation of those key signaling components, also important. And then glare, so the aging eye, because of the nature of the inner optics becoming more dense, more cloudy, causes more scattering, and it increases glare sensitivity. So the elderly basically require more light, more blue enriched light, and yet they need to not have glare. So we need to be more sensitive to glare, which is really kind of a counterintuitive problem to have. Also, the elderly experience a reduction in the circadian amplitude. So the vigilance and sleepiness seem to be less de-amplified, so it becomes a little bit more complicated. And then there's cognitive decline amongst the elderly, which is associated with increased circadian disruption, sundown syndrome, as well as wandering day and night. Of course, the elderly also generally have disrupted sleep as a result of more frequent nocturnal urination, pain, as well as just overall sleeplessness. So I'll talk about kind of these things specifically in the next couple slides. More specifically about dementia, what we understand in dementia patients is that 60% of patients with dementia have circadian rhythm disorders. And what these circadian rhythm disorders are associated with increased morbidities or diseases, increased mortality rates, and a poorer quality of life. And so what we now understand as well is that these circadian rhythm disorders actually exacerbate Alzheimer's disease, and it's a slippery slope because Alzheimer's disease exacerbates the circadian rhythm disorders, as we kind of showed here. So basically what happens is if you have circadian problems, you get poorer sleep. That poorer sleep leads to things that lead to increased Alzheimer's disease or cognitive decline, which leads to even more circadian dysregulations, which leads to even poorer sleep, which leads to, more exacerbated Alzheimer's disease. And so it becomes this truly slippery slope that if we increase the circadian regulation, amplify that circadian signal, we can actually kind of stop it at the root cause. So another problem is sundown syndrome. So increased agitation. Sundown syndrome is increased agitation, often occurring in the late afternoon or early evening or night. And so this is highly prevalent amongst individuals with dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And this really increases the burden on the caregiver. Cataracts. So the aging eye gets less light, but cataracts yellows with time. So it actually yellows the lens, and that blocks a lot more of these critical circadian signals. So just to give a illustration of what that looks like, so a 10-year-old, so this is what the transmission of the lens looks like. So this red on top is what a 10-year-old lens looks like. It transmits everything perfectly. But once you get to be about age 70, it follows this orange line, which drops the reduction of the blue wavelengths more so than anything else. And so these wavelengths are associated with the color on the color bar on the bottom. So these royal blues are attenuated the most, where this sky blue receptor is here in the 490. So it seems like the cataracts are actually trying to block some of the royal blues, but still trying to permit some of that circadian response through. So to kind of give a sense of what this looks like under an LED source. So this is what a standard LED source looks like to a 10-year-old. Perfect transmission. Really, as we said before, a poor supplier of those sky blue signals that are important. But when you take this and actually take the same light source to a 70-year-old, you'll see that this is what that same LED light source looks like to that 70-year-old. So it's dramatically dropping off all those blue signals. So what started out as a poor stimulator of the circadian response now becomes a very poor one as a result of these cataracts. And so traditional LED lighting is just not at all appropriate for the elderly. But there is evidence that shows that biological light can help. So biological light has been shown, and I'll go over what that means, shown to increase daytime activity, shown to delay sleep and wake time. In other words, to make them less of an early bird, and that's important. Strengthen that circadian rhythm, strengthen that circadian response, which is important as it relates to dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Because of that slippery slope we talked about earlier. And this has been shown directly to reduce the cognitive decline just by having that biological light in the space. And then also reduce the sundowning. And then another study showed more socially acceptable activity timing. So they were more active at the correct time of day as opposed to having that increased agitation, at night, wandering at night. So on and so forth. And then, of course, there was another study that shows less sleep disturbances throughout the night. Again, more consolidation of sleep. And that is, again, very important on that idea of sleep fragmentation. And another added benefit is that one study showed that the caregiver also had increases in their mood and their sleep as a result of getting this biological light. So, what does biological light mean? Well, biological light does not have to be this cold, stark, unappealing light that a lot of people generally think about when they think about biological lighting or daylight. Daylight has a 6,500 Kelvin color temperature. It doesn't need to be this, because what we understand is that that the spectrum can actually be tuned to converge biology with vision, and now you can have a highly biological light that actually has a color temperature that is much more appealing. And so to kind of help you guys understand that, I kind of go into a little bit about what color vision is like. And so how we see color and how you're seeing this presentation, you have 3 cones, a blue cone, a green cone, and a red cone. And this is how we see color. So melanopsin is a different one that plots almost perfectly in the middle, right? Which is pretty cool. But melanopsin doesn't contribute to color. And that allows us to isolate the biology from the color vision, what you actually see or perceive, which is very cool. And so just to give you an example of that, here is a traditional circadian product, and it meets everyone's expectation. It's 6,000 Kelvin. There's some stats on what it does, but this is what results in the light that looks like this. And so LED lighting specifically pinpoints the visual photoreceptors, but generally has a tremendous drop-off in that sky blue region, the circadian region. And so while you're you're getting a dramatic visual response, the biological response seems to be very lacking. And so if you do something and you reimagine this and you understand that this is the visual response that's going on, and you really want to isolate that biological response, what you would do instead is maybe reappropriate this blue signal into that good blue region that doesn't have that much of a color response. And what you could do is now you could drop this down, reappropriate it over here into this, what we call the good blue region, or the sky blue region. And then you could do things with the visual components. And now you could create something that has an enhanced biological function and is still a very warm and pleasant environment, something that you actually want to have in your space, without compromising anything. And one thing that you'll know is that if you do it in this way, you're actually bypassing the lens decrements of the yellowing of the lens, which drops off this, the royal blues. If you take that out together and put it in the more appropriate region, you actually penetrate that lens much more efficiently. And so you're getting a double down response. You're actually getting higher biological response from a light source that actually looks appealing, which is very cool. So that's how the spectrum component comes to play. So how would you do it in practice? So what we understand from the research is that day-long light exposure has been proven to be the best. The best results were combined with exercise. I know that's not always viable, but specifically if you could do late afternoon, early evening exercise, it's certainly something to pay note of. It specifically was useful against sundown syndrome, but there are also studies that showed that the light by itself was enough to combat sundown syndrome. But there is a synergistic effect with exercise if that's applicable. It is not recommended to follow the sun, especially in short day scenarios. So if you're in the northern latitude during the winter time, if you have a sundown at 4 or 5 p.m., it may not be beneficial because it's not socially acceptable to have everyone kind of start winding down at 4 or 5 p.m. So it may be more appropriate to have something that goes on and is working around a social schedule, 7 p.m. or so. And that'll actually dramatically help make sure that everyone's kind of on the same schedule, which is important for the caregiver. So what are the design factors that are important? One thing that we know is that spatial distribution is a key design factor. What we understand is that there's a handful of studies, different camps that have shown this, that light coming from above the horizon, in that above the horizon region, has the strongest circadian impact, where light coming from below the horizon has almost a negligible impact. So side periphery is also as good. And this is actually very important because a lot of the design practices are designing for horizontal luminances. But this idea of light coming from above the horizon having the strongest impact makes a ton of sense, because these photoreceptors are daytime photoreceptors that have a peak sensitivity in the sky blue region. They're looking for this from the sky, and well, that sky signal comes from above the horizon. So it's very important. Also, there's a lot of discussion about some of the amber lights, and so there is obviously some interest in amber light, and it may have a lot to do with the spectrum and the color, and there's a lot of scientific evidence to support that. But also, things like fire come from a very different place, and so there's people who talk about we're designed to sleep next to a fire. We evolved around that. But it could have a lot more to do with the fact that these photoreceptors aren't looking for a signal coming from below the horizon. So it's something that's very interesting. Also, what we understand is timing is just as important. Now, Harvard did a lot of really cool and really controlled studies that show these dramatic effects of our circadian rhythm in response to light. But basically, I'm going to give you the layman speak of how this all works. we have a daytime photoreceptor in our eye that is looking for a daytime signal to synchronize our bodies to it. If we see that daytime signal before we expect it, our clock will speed up and basically try to catch up. So it'll basically go, oh, that daytime signal showed up before I expect it. I'm going to speed everything up to try to catch up to that new daytime signal. If we see a daytime signal after we expect it, we're going to slow everything down and go, hey, daytime's still here. We want to make sure that things don't happen too soon. None of those biological processes occur too soon. So we're going to slow everything down so we're still in line with that daytime signal. So putting it all together, what we want to do is during the daytime, we want to have this, we want to light up our sky. Basically what we understand is the built environment has blocked that sky signal. We want to put it back. Those walls are our new sky. So high photopic lux on those walls, high vertical lux, a melanopic rich spectrum will drive that sky blue signal. And at nighttime, you just darken those sky walls, pull the light off those walls, very low vertical lux, and you could have a melanopic depleted spectrum, but you could focus the light on those horizontal surfaces because what we understand is those are limited circadian responses. So let me illustrate what that means. Let's say you had an assisted living community example, and this is maybe the viewpoint of a member of that community. And so his viewpoint, he or she's viewpoint, is such that this is his horizon, where this is his sky, and this is his fire. And so at nighttime, all you really need to do is dim down that upper region, that sky portion, and the daytime, brighten that up. But what you could do is you still have that lower portion at nighttime for navigation purposes, for safety purposes, all that, but you don't have to brighten up the entire room to get that. So you could have these different types of lights that have different functions that create this sky and fire scene through layering of light, different light scenarios. And so that kind of holistically wraps it up. And so now that sky doesn't have to be cool white, it just has to have the right spectrum. And the fire, again, could be something that's melanopic depleted. So with that is really kind of wrapping up everything. And that concludes this talk.
All right, thank you, Robert.
Here's some details on how to reach me. And if you guys need copies of this, if you have any questions, think of something after this session, or want copies of the presentation, you're certainly able to email me. And this
I think you'll have plenty of questions, Robert. So this concludes the AIA CES education portion of this course, but we're not done yet. We do have just a few more minutes to go through any questions you may have, and you should see a Q&A button in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. Just click on that to type in your questions. And we do have a few questions already asked. And what would you suggest, Robert? The first question is, what would you suggest as a rank of importance for specifiers who are new to this concept? Should we start with focusing on the ceiling lighting or horizon lighting? And I think this question is in specific to that last slide that you had showing the horizon and the sky, or the fire, the sky and the fire situation.
Right. So what we understand is most lighting currently is pretty poor at giving these sky blue signals. So what I would focus on is the, from a specification standpoint, is the above the horizon standpoint.
Okay. And in the above horizon standpoint, when you dimmed down that horizon and you change that, are you addressing changing the Kelvin temperature or color of light, or is it one or the other?
Yeah, so hopefully what came across is that that's not necessary, that there are ways to isolate that biological standpoint above and beyond just what the visual response is. So you can change the color temperature, and there's some things that, you know, within each color temperature there's a capacity for how much biological stimulation you can have. But really what you can do is create an environment that is warm and comfortable and inviting, and it meets the aesthetic that you want. But having an above the horizon signal, for example, that that meets all those biological signals as well can certainly help create that delineation of day versus night.
Okay.
And what we've seen, so you could create layers that may not have to change the color temperature, but change the biological inputs. So basically through things that you don't see.
Okay. Here's another question here. It says, falling asleep with the television on, what kind of impact would that have to our senior community with the TVs running all the time? Is that the bad blue light, or could you explain what you think about that?
Yeah. So there are blue signals in the TV screen. So if you fall asleep with the TV on at night, the signals that are coming from there are relative to what you got during the daytime. So these photoreceptors are trying to figure out, what's day and what's night. If it gets some inputs where that TV signal is bright enough to kind of compete with that daytime signal, it could significantly cause some sleep disturbances. But generally, that TV is not strong enough to do much. And really, the best way to combat that is by giving proper daytime signals, which is something that is not well communicated or understood. Is that it really is a function of how poorly the daytime environment is.
Okay. Another question we have is, we hear something about circadian rhythms and how they're related to the amber lighting in bathrooms. If you could explain that.
Yeah, so the reason why amber lights are great amber lights first are great for bathrooms. They have very, very, very limited circadian response. So circadian stimulation. The reason why that's important for the bathroom is because of that idea that these community members have more frequent visits in the middle of the night to the restroom, and so you don't want to get the wrong signal at that time. Of course, there's also the acute alerting effects of that blue light. So having minimized all that allows you to navigate to the bathroom safely, not having a circadian disruption and not having an acute alerting effect as well. And so I do actually want to say that amber is preferred versus red, specifically in that regard.
Okay. And we'll just have a few other minutes here, and I do wanted to ask you, how does we as a community that specifies lighting and appropriate lighting for the senior community, how do we start? How does your company help us achieve what this is doing? Or how does your research, I should ask, how does your research achieve what we're trying to specify in our lighting community?
Yeah, so what we've done is we focus on the research at BIOS, and we develop light engines or basically light sources, and we partner with lighting manufacturers. What we learned very quickly is that there's a lot of different SKUs of different finishes, different mounting types, different all sorts of things. So what we do is we partner with the people who focus directly on that, and provide our spectrum inside that so that people can specify through one of our partners. And I would say that the AIA portion of this is complete. So I could say that our partners currently, you can go to our website and find our partners, but our partners currently are Pinnacle Lighting as well as Leader Brands.
Okay.
So they provide general illumination and downlights, so we are actually actively working on expanding that offering to multiple people.
Okay.
But what we think, and specifically what we designed this around, was very simple controls, because we didn't think that all of the advanced controls were really doing much benefit, and all the color tuning stuff doesn't really do enough to justify how expensive and complicated everything is. So we wanted to create something that is standalone, very, very good, and achieves all the goals that we want, and then we provide the designer with the understanding of what's important so that you can create these scenes that dramatically create this day-night delineation way more efficiently and way more effectively than color tuning or any of the other more complicated solutions.
Okay. And before everyone logs off too, we just want to have address a few other questions. Robert, if you're able to stay on the line.
Sure.
Just a few more minutes. Great. Before anyone else logs off too, there is a survey at the end here. We would love your comments and feedback if you would like more information on future webinars that relate specifically to this. But Robert, we have another question too of, does all the lighting in the room need to use this technology, or can certain lights affect enough of the environment? And again, this goes to the whole entire community or one specific room, or how do we, again, that question of how do we address this best?
Right. So generally there are lights that do kind of the heavy lifting for the general illumination, and so those are the ones that I would say to start with. There are also things like wall sconces that do some of the illumination of those walls. So there are things that can be done with kind of more of that general illumination rather than say some of the table lamps or something, for example. So that general illumination is the primary one. And I would say my experiences are the best way to achieve this is to put it in say a assisted living community, is to put this lighting in more of the community spaces, not into the individual room, and really try to get those community members to go into the community spaces which has this lighting.
Okay.
That would be the ideal scenario. If that cannot happen, then certainly bringing that into the individual rooms would be useful, but it certainly gets a little bit more complicated to achieve that.
Of course. Well, thank you so much, Robert. And again, any other questions, please contact Robert with your questions too, and he would be happy to answer those after the seminar or in an email or something. So that does wrap up our Biologically Focused Lighting for Health and Wellness, a SAGE webinar presented by Robert Soler. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Robert, for sharing such valuable information and insights. And I love your energy getting excited about circadian rhythms.
Oh,
it certainly shows.
Absolutely my passion.
We hope you all have enjoyed. Yes?
I thank you all for your attention, because I love to share my passion.
It definitely shows. We hope you have enjoyed today's session and found it certainly worthwhile. And we do value your input. We look forward to hearing your comments on this webinar and future webinars. At the conclusion of this webinar, you will be prompted to fill out a quick survey. Please provide comments or suggestions which can help us improve as well as provide interesting topics for the next session. Stay tuned for emailed announcements of upcoming webinars, and on behalf of SAGE, thank you so much for joining us.